Teachers, what is the most creative way of cheating you've seen? Story 1. Not the student, but the teacher. So, the teacher, let's call him Mr. A, had a reputation for being a phenomenal teacher who had every student engaged/invested in his class, no matter how mundane the subject was. Anytime he asked a question, every student's hand would shoot up in the air with them shouting things like, "Call on me," or "I know the answer." Simply, Mr. A developed a reputation in the district as one of its best teachers. Fast forward a couple of years and I'm grabbing coffee with Mr. A and I ask him, "What's your trick? How did you get every student bought in?" His response was, "Well, I told the kids every time we had a visitor in class, I need you to all raise your hand like I'm giving away free candy. But if you don't know the answer, raise your left hand. If you do know it, raise your right hand so I know who to call on and we all look good." Worked like a charm. I want to see the one day where everyone in class raised their left hands. Story 2. In high school, I was in a computer-based learning program and our science tests were taken digitally. However, they used a program where once you entered the test, your entire screen was locked into the test, and the only way to exit it was to click the finish button on the test or turn off your computer, which effectively did the same thing. Another feature of the program was that once you were in the test, anything you had in your clipboard, copied text, was not able to be pasted into the answer sections on the test, to prevent the only other way to cheat. However, after creating my own classroom at home, making fake tests, and playing with the program to figure out a way to cheat, I realized that it would allow you to copy things from inside the test and paste them elsewhere in this test. The developers of the program also did not take into account the sign-in screen where you have to find the test and enter it. Long story short, I could copy the entire page of notes I had taken on the test material and paste it into the section where I would enter my login information, then recopy it, enter the test, and paste it again in one of the answer sections, using it to answer every question and then deleting it before clicking finish. You are the person developers have nightmares about. Story 3. I was a teacher's assistant for anatomy and physiology. The professor would ask for me to sit in on finals to prevent cheating. One kid came in with vitamin water. No worries. Halfway through the test, the professor noticed they kept turning the bottle and squinting. This goes on for another 20 minutes. Professor goes up, grabs the vitamin water, and rips off the label. It had a crib sheet written on the back. The students had gone to the effort to make a fake vitamin water bottle label and write notes on the back. The professor was impressed by the creativity and decided to give the student a 0 and not report them to the academic committee. Story 4. So, as a teacher, the smartest way I cheat is by giving the kids a note card and telling them they can put whatever cheat sheet stuff on there they want. It tricks them into actually studying for their math tests. Also, a pro tip from a math teacher, most students don't know how to study for math, and this is why they struggle. Think of studying math like practicing an instrument. You need to learn a piece by practicing multiple problems from your skill set. If you aren't practicing at least 8 to 18 problems at least every day for 2 days, then you're never going to get past the little mistakes and missteps which have probably plagued you. Story 5. So, not a teacher, but I witnessed probably the biggest cheating-related scandal in our high school's history. For context, we had the sweetest old guy as our chem teacher. He called everyone bud, or buddy, or ma'am. He always helped, and he volunteered to teach driver's ed after school so kids could learn to drive. He always had a twinkle in his eye because he genuinely showed love and kindness to everyone. A side effect of this was that he was very trusting. So one day, before finals, he ran to the bathroom during class while everyone was wrapping up their lab reports. While he was gone, someone ran to his desk, found the finals just sitting there, snapped a pic, then ran back to their desk before he got back. Somehow, no one tattled. Probably because 90% of our grade level in that class was on board with it. The pictures got texted around, but a few people were smart enough to Bluetooth into each other so it couldn't be tracked. Well, after the test, everyone had high scores, and apparently someone confessed. This resulted in a huge investigation by the assistant principals, school police officers, and faculty. They traced every text message and busted so many people, all except the ones who transferred via Bluetooth. They had to reissue the test. Man, that was crazy. I felt so bad for the teacher. He was really sad someone had taken advantage of him, and I was too. Such a good dude. Story 6. There was a class that allowed you to bring one sheet of handwritten notes to exams. I knew a guy that created a font of his own handwriting and used to print the entire study guide onto a piece of notebook paper, front and back. He even set the font color to pencil gray and managed to get the margins and spacing exactly right to look like it had been handwritten. Modern problems require modern solutions. Story 7. During a keyboard harmony lab exam, a room with 28 keyboards, one devious student had previously recorded another student's perfect performance of the exam piece on Midi, in, out, through. The cheater played the recorded piece on Midi, but used all the right hand motions on his keyboard at the back of the room to try to fool me that he wasn't actually playing it in real time. Unfortunately for him, the student he recorded happened to be my piano student, and I recognized the distinctive playing immediately. I didn't embarrass him during class by calling him out on it, but dealt with the problem privately, a lesson he told me later that would stay with him for the remainder of his life. Story 8. As a student, I remember my entire year level was accused of cheating, as the test results came back consistently high. What the teachers failed to realize was that some of the answers were actually hidden in other questions. So if you got stuck on one question, you could find the answer later on in another question. An example would be, this was a Japanese language test, what does blank word mean? And later on, a question would use that word in context, so you would understand what that word meant. Story 9. I'm a high school teacher, but this story is about my own high school math teacher playing us and cheating. It was an honors algebra/geometry class, and it was well known that Mr. D reused the same questions every year, just changed the numbers. He made a big deal about making sure we all gave our exam papers back to him after we had looked at our scores and gone over everything together to prevent cheating for the next year. Well, of course, some of my classmates got their hands on a complete set of tests from the previous year. Before each exam, we would sit together and make sure we knew how to solve every problem on that test, so we could do it on the real exam with different numbers. Years later, when I became a teacher myself, I saw Mr. D at a funeral. I confessed to him that this is what we used to do. He smirked and said, "Who do you think leaked the test packet to get you to study?" Mr. D had figured out that the kids won't study if the teacher suggests it. But if they think they're getting away with something, they totally will. So he managed to get a test packet out and circulate it as contraband. Blew my mind. Mr. D only play 4D chess. Story 10. In some tests at university, we had the questions projected on the white table/wall, so the whole class had the same test and we had multiple choice, A, B, C, D, E. So the whole year, we agreed that for each of these letters, we would pair a sign of holding the pen. If it's A, point your pen forward. B, point it to the right. C, to the back. D, to the left. E, to upwards, and if you don't know the answer, just put down your pen. So we just had to carefully look around for a moment and see what most pens are pointing at, and we know the answer right away. In my opinion, it is the safest cheating because there's no evidence and no teacher will notice if you make a careful peek for a half second. Story 11. My high school trig professor administered all tests via programs he wrote in our class TI-83 calculators. Basically, it was just a simple set of questions and answers that automatically graded you after each question. I quickly realized I could just close the program and inspect the code using the edit function, extract the answers, and give myself a high B or low A, never 100%, as that was a sure way to get caught. He soon realized students were doing this and obfuscated his code to make it much harder to find the answers by simple inspection. It took a little more work, but I was still able to find the answers, and he quickly began to suspect again that students were cheating. Later, he found a way to force the code to self-delete after it was run for the first time. He would start the test for each calculator before passing them out, so if you tried to access the edit, it would delete itself if you tried to run the program again. I ended up bringing a set of dead batteries on the same brand that he used, accessing the edit, replacing the batteries with the dead ones, and telling him the calculator died halfway through my test. I think I learned more about software testing than trig that year. Story 12. I remember in middle school we would rely on the one kid who actually studied. Most of the quizzes our teachers gave were multiple choice, so if the answer was A, the kid would cough. If the answer was B, he would sniffle. If the answer was C, he would sigh, and if the answer was D, he would stretch in his seat. Everyone in my science class was eventually that kid. Every time there was a quiz, a different person in the class would study. Story 13. Not a teacher, but definitely accused by one of cheating, though I wasn't. High school, English class. We were reading 4 books in this 2-month period, and then we were to have a test on all 4. We had finished reading the first 3, and we were about to start on the last one when I got sick. Was about 2 weeks. Came back just in time for the test. Multiple choice test, choices A to D. Questions were from each of the books, with each letter answered from one of the 4 books. It was fairly easy to figure out the answers from the book I hadn't read by eliminating the answers from the books I had read. Was accused of cheating, but the teacher couldn't prove it. We only read the books in class, and I was gone while reading the last book. She never figured out how I answered the questions correctly about the book I never read. Story 14. Not a teacher, but here are the methods I used back in the day. I wrote formulas on those pens that had roll-out calendars. Almost got caught when I accidentally lost my grip and the calculator rolled back in the pen in such a loud way that my classmates looked at me. I also wrote formulas on my clothes and body, the hem of my shirt, and the part of my legs that gets covered by a sock. I put a couple of chapters on the notebook app on the old BlackBerry. I did this by hand, which involved me copying straight from the book to my phone. Put answers in the song lyrics on my iPod, but I didn't do this frequently. I forgot why. It was either because my school had cracked down on technology, phones, iPods, laptops, or I just had a hard time scrolling with the click wheel. We'd straight up swap papers. I think I only did it during trig because during exams we were arranged alphabetically, and I was seated next to this dude who was really good at math. I was afraid of doing this, but the fact that we were so close to each other made it less scary, so I did. The only time I got caught was when this teacher noticed that I kept taking out my handkerchief, which had a 1x1 inch piece of paper that had some formulas. In hindsight, if I pulled a bit of sleight of hand, I would have never been caught. The funny thing is, the year before, I cheated on a test with 2-letter-sized papers. Story 15. In my high school, we had a Facebook group chat with almost all, students from the same year. So if 2 classes had the same teacher, we would get the same tests, but we would always have the exam on the same day. So, during the exam, someone from my class would take a picture of the exam and post it in the group chat, and somebody from the other class that wasn't having the exam at the moment would send the answers back in the group chat. So, everyone, almost, in class would be on their phones and see the answer from the group chat. Later, the class that was giving us the answers would have the exam having all the answers already because, as I said, they would get the same exam as we did, usually used for math, chemistry, and physics. Story 16. When I was in grad school, I went to a prestigious and large university where a lot of people tried to cheat, and the cheating countermeasures they took were often so elaborate. People would try to tape helpful guides to the back of toilets or crumple them up and throw them into a trash can so that they could go to the bathroom and get them during the exam. As a result, the bathrooms were inspected and the trash was emptied at the start of every exam, and students were accompanied to the bathroom. Hats weren't allowed because students would try writing things on the underside of the brim. You had to watch out for students who had written things on their bodies, because they might be shifting in odd ways during the exams to get a look at them. There were special buildings that were only used for exams, and additional people were there to help proctor. Professors had to submit exams to the school a month in advance, and the school was responsible for securely photocopying and distributing them at the exam. My field, English, wasn't one where cheating was particularly a big problem, but we still had to take all the same precautions as more high-stakes fields. Chemistry is a big one, because it is often a stumbling block for people trying to get into medical school. Story 17. Obligatory not a teacher, but a student. This is for a multiple-choice exam. For context, we have uniforms and wear black leather shoes. Toe taps indicate the answer, 1 tap for A, 2 tap for B, and if asking, increments the question number by 1. Heel taps increment the question numbers by previously agreed number, usually 5 or 10. Toe slash to indicate you're asking, or when broadcasting means stopping the question number count to indicate the answer, or you lost your count and redo. A double slash sounds like erasing. Then a small kick to the chair in front of you to alert or stop the exchange. This is barely noticeable, yet easily heard as tapping your foot is quite normal. You'll only look nervous, plus you can mix the toe and heel taps like a beat. A kick makes the chair squeak on the floor and serves as a distraction too. An exchange would go like this: HHT, 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 STTTT. In the easily recognizable pattern of Queen's We Will Rock You, it tells the question numbers 33 with the answer D, separated with a single slash. Anticlimactically, we were caught by our teacher during a mock test, and the first dry run of this code, only because the 2 guys whose way of cheating was caught ratted us out. Story 18. So, my dad once helped a friend of his, let's call him Sam, cheat during an exam. Now, Sam was miserably failing chemistry in his last year, but he was lucky. They were doing 2 different exams back-to-back on the same day, and to ensure no one was sneaking a peek at their neighbor's papers, they had 1 row for French and 1 row for chemistry. If you finished your first exam, you went to the teacher, handed in your exam, and got the other exam. Now, Sam asked the teacher if he could hand out the exams, to which the teacher said yes. Now, it's important to note that it was June and very hot, so the windows were open. So, as Sam approached the end of the first row, he had the chemistry exam. He threw an exam out the window onto the street where my helpful dad just happened to wait with Sam's chemistry notes. Dad picks it up and answers all the questions on a blank piece of paper. Now, when Sam was done with his French exam, he asked the teacher if he could go take a piss. Seeing as he had handed in his French but hadn't gotten his chemistry exam, yet the teacher obliged and let him leave the classroom. Now, my dad is waiting at the toilets to just hand him the piece of paper with the answer on it, and all was good. He just wrote the answers on his cheat paper on his actual exam papers and handed it in. Never got caught. Also, my dad was kinda Sam's guardian, and it still amazes me that my dad told me this story. Story 19. In high school, I had a Dixon No. 2 yellow pencil with all the formulas for geometry carefully inscribed on it. I'd done it in such a way that the writing was an indent, so you had to hold the pencil just so as to see the writing. In college, I had a calculator apps for chemistry, periodic table, chemical naming, /formula, etc., and often had notes in the calculator. In one class, the teacher handed out the key to the test as you were leaving and didn't confiscate phones. About half of the class, not me, got texted the answers and blew the scores out of the curve. The next test was significantly harder. The hardest I've ever studied for a C. Usually A's were easy. Back. Story 20. The class was real analysis, and there was one problem that was absolutely going to be number 1 on the final exam. It had been number 1 for every final exam this professor had ever written, of which he gave us copies to study from, and it was number 1 on the study guide for our final. I couldn't do it. I tried and tried and tried, and studied and got help, and whatever I did, I could not figure out the finer point of this specific type of proof, given in this specific context. So I resorted to memorizing the steps and getting it down to a sequence of blanks I could fill in. Exam day comes. I bought 2 blue books that morning, test booklets with lined paper inside. In one of them, I very, very faintly write the answer to number 1, complete with space to fill in the aforementioned blanks. On the front, I fill in my name to differentiate it from the other booklet. When the professor tells us to take out our blue books and trade with the person next to us, I trade my blank blue book. I take the one I'm given and slip it into my backpack at the same time I slide out my blue book with my calculator and pencil, so it all looked legit. I got my test. Number 1 doesn't fail. It is exactly as expected. I fill in the blanks and write over my words. I continue on with the exam, and I pass the class. Story 21. I was supervising a final chemistry exam along with another coworker. Not 15 minutes in, a hand slams down on a desk and I turn around expecting the worst, only to see my coworker angrily shouting at a pair of really frightened 10th graders, whose desk he smashed. Amidst the shouting, I caught the words, Morse code. The guy proceeded to take them to the office. I called the hallway supervisor to take over and ran after the group. Apparently, the kids were slightly tapping the answers amongst themselves in Morse code. Not even with their fingernails, just their fingertips. I never heard a thing. My coworker happened to catch B in Morse code or something. I honestly thought he finally went crazy solely because of his appearance. Picture Robin Williams in Jumanji going, "What year is it?" I'm 100% sure that if this coworker weren't in the room, they'd have gotten away with it for sure. Story 22. Not sure if this would work anymore, but if I had a paper to write on a book I didn't read, I would find a well-written paper online, then translate the entire thing from English to German, German to French, French to Spanish, then Spanish back to English, pull the original paper and the new one up side by side and clean up the grammar on the new paper, and you've got the same concept, but written just differently enough to not be plagiarism. Worked like a charm. Story 23. During an AP US history test in high school, we had a question asked about the author of a book. Kid raises his hand and says, "Mrs. Blank, I read, name of the book, this weekend and I really liked it." The teacher, obviously forgetting that she had put this question on the test, replies with, "Oh, by author's name? I love that book." The whole class burst out laughing, but no one said anything because she had just given us the answer to the test question, lol. Story 24. I remember a story from my OChem professor. This student all semester who wasn't showing up to class kept getting his score improved significantly after regrades. They got their tests back, had a day to review them, and were allowed to resubmit for a regrade. They knew he was cheating because of the unlikelihood of grading mistakes on multiple exams, but the teacher's assistant, TA, who graded it couldn't confidently say it wasn't their handwriting. Ultimately, it was an office worker for the department who figured it out near the end of the semester. His staples were angled differently than the exams handed out that were mass stapled. He was recreating the test, printing it, re-answering it, and then grading it with the same pen as the TAs and had done a good job copying the writing style. Story 25. In elementary/middle school, we had to write a paragraph each week featuring all the vocabulary words included in that unit. One clever kid wrote something along these lines. One day, kid name had to write a paragraph for English class. He sat down, picked up a pen, and used these words in it. Proceeds to list out all the words. The teacher only let it go once because she never saw that happen until then.